we put that together to create a pitch to do season 2, because we've been trying to figure out a way to do season 2. We didn't want to do it in the same way we did it before. But anyway, so My Last Days was...
A young actor, Justice Smith, also appears in the film and delivers a truly phenomenal performance, bringing energy and depth to his role that has impressed both audiences and critics alike. At the same time, rumors began circulating about whether Ryan Reynolds intentionally distanced himself from Blake Lively at the premiere of Another Simple Favor in an effort to protect his own career and public image. Industry insiders claim that situations like these are often carefully controlled behind the scenes, with PR teams preparing for every possible outcome. They reportedly plan responses in advance, instruct journalists on what questions they are permitted to ask, and sometimes restrict interactions to selected media outlets that are considered supportive or friendly. Such strategies are designed to shape public perception and maintain a carefully curated image, especially when controversies begin to surface. Meanwhile, speculation grew even more intense when reports suggested that Chris Evans had revealed shocking claims about a major Marvel-related controversy involving Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds. The couple, long regarded as one of Hollywood's most admired and seemingly untouchable power pairs, suddenly found themselves surrounded by serious accusations and widespread online discussion. These claims suggested the existence of a secretive scheme connected to Marvel that could potentially damage their carefully maintained squeaky clean reputation. According to the rumors, Blake was allegedly at the center of a hidden plan within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, supposedly driven by a strong ambition for greater fame, influence, and financial success. The unfolding narrative is filled with dramatic elements, including alleged secret agreements, suspicious exchanges of messages, and possible betrayals behind closed doors. This has left many observers questioning whether Blake truly manipulated events and drew Ryan into the controversy, or whether the situation is being misunderstood entirely and an even bigger twist has yet to emerge. Amid the growing scrutiny and mounting public attention, Blake Lively stepped onto the red carpet hoping to quiet her critics and restore her reputation in the spotlight. What was expected to be a triumphant and glamorous return at the premiere of Another Simple Favor instead became an unexpectedly uncomfortable and challenging experience. Rather than being greeted with enthusiastic admiration, flashing cameras, and loud applause, the atmosphere felt noticeably tense and distant from the very beginning. Photographers continued capturing images, but the energy surrounding the event seemed cold and restrained, lacking the excitement typically associated with such high-profile appearances. Conversations and interactions appeared awkward, smiles seemed forced, and the overall mood was heavy with an unspoken sense of unease that even Blake herself could not ignore. The situation grew even more unsettling when a protester standing outside the venue held up a sign reading, "Justice for Justin Bolden," adding another layer of tension to an evening that was meant to celebrate her return but instead became one of the most uncomfortable public moments of her career. Blake's response only fueled the controversy further, as many critics accused her of being dishonest. To observers, this wasn't simply a random heckler or an isolated incident involving a frustrated fan. It was seen as a direct challenge to her credibility, and a highly visible symbol of the resentment that had been building against her for months. Hollywood may be built on carefully crafted images and polished public personas, but in that moment, no amount of charm, elegance, or practiced smiles could hide the growing backlash unfolding in front of her. The illusion she had worked so hard to maintain appeared to be slipping, and the tension surrounding her public appearances became impossible to ignore. For months, Blake had seemingly tried to carry on as though the turmoil surrounding her did not exist. The ongoing legal disputes, the damaging PR fallout, persistent rumors involving Ryan Reynolds, and her highly publicized conflict with Justin Bolden had all contributed to a storm of negative attention. Yet she continued to move forward with public appearances, promotional events, and red carpet moments, seemingly hoping that maintaining a confident image would eventually cause the controversy to fade away. Instead, the opposite appeared to happen. Hollywood's response had begun to shift, and the once supportive industry environment no longer felt welcoming. Media coverage became increasingly critical, public perception grew harsher, and people who were once considered Alize's friends, colleagues, and longtime supporters appeared to be quietly distancing themselves. One of the most striking moments came when Anna Kendrick, Blake's pitch-perfect co-star and longtime industry peer, was asked about the possibility of working with her again. Rather than offering the usual diplomatic or carefully worded response typical of Hollywood interviews, Kendrick delivered a brief but powerful reply. She simply stated that she did not want to talk about Blake. The comment was short, but its impact was significant. Her tone carried no warmth, no attempt at politeness, and no suggestion of continued friendship. To many observers, it signaled a clear emotional and professional distance, reinforcing the idea that Blake's support within the industry was weakening. In front of the cameras, Blake's efforts to restore her reputation appeared to falter further. Blake was not the only one drawing attention for his reaction. Henry Golding, another co-star, seemed to deliver what many interpreted as a subtle but unmistakable criticism during an interview. With a smile that appeared to mask sarcasm, he reportedly remarked, "What could go wrong?" The comment, while brief, carried an undertone that suggested frustration or disappointment to those closely watching the situation. It hinted that Blake's once strong professional relationships might be unraveling behind the scenes, and that tensions within her circle were becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. What had been planned as a glamorous return to Hollywood's spotlight was instead transforming into a cautionary example of how quickly public perception can change. The combination of visible protests, distant responses from co-stars, and growing industry skepticism exposed cracks in Blake Lively's carefully maintained image. The narrative surrounding her was no longer one of success and admiration, but increasingly one of controversy and reputational strain. And for many observers, it seemed clear that the consequences of the situation were still unfolding, with further developments likely to follow. Adding to the speculation, critics suggested that strategic decisions regarding public appearances and promotional efforts were being carefully managed in response to the backlash. Some claimed that certain choices, such as limiting appearances with Ryan Reynolds or presenting a more cautious public persona, were attempts to reshape public perception. According to these interpretations, Blake had once appeared confident in her influence and her husband's powerful position within the industry, believing that their combined star power could control the narrative. However, as public opinion shifted, that confidence appeared to give way to a more defensive approach. Meanwhile, the broader industry response suggested that her challenges extended beyond public opinion alone. Reports indicated that several of her once supportive co-stars were no longer openly backing her, further signaling a change in professional dynamics. Rather than simply trying to repair her image in the public eye, Blake now seemed to be struggling to maintain the respect and trust of the very people who had once supported her career. The atmosphere in Hollywood had clearly changed, and the sense of loyalty that once surrounded her appeared to be weakening. The effects were reportedly felt beyond personal relationships as well. Luxury brands that had once competed to feature her in advertising campaigns and endorsements were said to be quietly reconsidering their partnerships. Behind closed doors, industry insiders allegedly described her as a growing financial risk, suggesting that the controversy surrounding her could impact brand reputation and commercial success. This shift in corporate attitude marked a significant turning point, indicating that the situation was no longer limited to media headlines or public gossip, but was beginning to influence real business decisions. Altogether, the unfolding events painted a picture of a star facing one of the most challenging periods of her career. What had once been a position of influence, admiration, and widespread industry support now appeared increasingly uncertain. As public scrutiny intensified and professional relationships seemed to strain, Blake Lively found herself at the center of a rapidly evolving narrative, one that continued to raise questions about her future, standing in Hollywood, and whether her reputation could ultimately recover.
I first heard about the film before I ever knew about Colleen's book, which gave me a unique entry point into the story. With so much going on in my life, I've admittedly missed a lot of pop culture and wasn't fully aware of her significant impact in the literary world. Despite the huge success of many of her books, meanwhile, a tense legal battle that has drawn global attention has unfolded between two major Hollywood figures, Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively. The conflict began months ago when Blake Lively filed a major lawsuit against Baldoni, accusing him of serious misconduct and seeking damages worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The allegations shocked both the media and the public. Many initially expected Baldoni to quietly settle the matter or attempt to limit the lawsuit through legal strategies. Instead, he surprised everyone by filing a counterclaim demanding even greater financial compensation, making it clear that he was not only prepared to defend himself but also willing to escalate the conflict, as both sides exchanged accusations and counterclaims. The case quickly developed into one of the most intense legal battles in recent Hollywood history. From the beginning, the situation was charged with tension, with legal experts suggesting that one side might eventually give in to avoid serious damage to their reputation. However, neither Lively nor Baldoni showed any sign of backing down, signaling a long and difficult legal fight ahead. Once the media picked up the story, it rapidly dominated headlines and captured widespread public attention. Commentators offered differing opinions, with some believing that Lively, known for her successful career and polished public image, must have had strong grounds for such serious allegations, while others argued that Baldoni, a rising figure as both an actor and director, would not risk his reputation with such a substantial counterclaim without solid evidence. The case soon extended beyond the courtroom, turning into a media spectacle fueled by social media discussions, online speculation, and public debate, which became nearly as influential as the legal proceedings themselves. After months of legal maneuvering, the dispute reached a critical stage when both parties finally appeared in court for a preliminary hearing. Outside the courthouse, the atmosphere looked like a scene from a blockbuster film, with paparazzi taking photos, news cameras recording every moment, and crowds gathering to catch a glimpse of the proceedings. Although the hearing lasted only 90 minutes, it was filled with intense arguments, calculated legal strategies, and early indications of what the full trial could reveal. According to sources close to the case, the judge focused largely on examining the seriousness of the allegations, evaluating the expected scale of the trial, and assessing how prepared both legal teams were for what appeared to be a major legal confrontation. From the moment Justin's attorney, Brian Friedman, entered the courtroom, his aggressive approach was evident. Dressed sharply and projecting confidence, he immediately challenged Blake's legal team, describing her lawsuit as unfounded and accusing her of attempting to damage Justin's reputation. He further claimed that her lawyers had tried to influence public opinion by leaking sensitive information to the press without giving Justin adequate time to respond, portraying these actions as a deliberate effort to pressure him before he could properly defend himself. Blake's attorneys rejected these accusations, denying any attempt to manipulate media coverage and insisting that Blake's goal was simply to bring the truth to light. However, Friedman maintained control of much of the courtroom discussion, arguing that the extensive media attention surrounding Blake's claims had already cast Justin in a negative light and forced him into a defensive position from the outset. Outside the courthouse, the atmosphere looked like a scene from a blockbuster film, with paparazzi taking photos, news cameras recording every moment, and crowds gathering to catch a glimpse of the proceedings. Although the hearing lasted only 90 minutes, it was filled with intense arguments, calculated legal strategies, and early indications of what the full trial could reveal. According to sources close to the case, the judge focused largely on examining the seriousness of the allegations, evaluating the expected scale of the trial, and assessing how prepared both legal teams were for what appeared to be a major legal confrontation. From the moment Justin's attorney, Brian Friedman, entered the courtroom, his aggressive approach was evident. Dressed sharply and projecting confidence, he immediately challenged Blake's legal team, describing her lawsuit as unfounded and accusing her of attempting to damage Justin's reputation. He further claimed that her lawyers had tried to influence public opinion by leaking sensitive information to the press without giving Justin adequate time to respond, portraying these actions as a deliberate effort to pressure him before he could properly defend himself. Blake's attorneys rejected these accusations, denying any attempt to manipulate media coverage and insisting that Blake's goal was simply to bring the truth to light. However, Friedman maintained control of much of the courtroom discussion, arguing that the extensive media attention surrounding Blake's claims had already cast Justin in a negative light and forced him into a defensive position from the outset. He asserted that Justin had every right to publicly respond, whether through interviews, social media, or even a dedicated website presenting what he described as clear and undeniable evidence. As Friedman's forceful defense continued, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted, visibly unsettling Blake's legal team. In response, one of her attorneys requested that the court restrict Friedman from making further public statements or engaging on social media, arguing that his ongoing commentary prevented Blake from receiving a fair opportunity to present her case. The judge, however, rejected this request, noting that both parties had spoken publicly about the dispute for months and that silencing only one side would be unfair. This ruling became a significant moment in the proceedings, effectively giving Justin and his legal team greater freedom to shape public opinion. Blake's attorneys were forced to reconsider their strategy after their attempt to limit Friedman's public involvement failed. The situation grew even more tense when her legal team learned about a newly launched website created by Justin. Adding another layer of complexity to the already escalating conflict, Justin Baldone launched a website designed to showcase evidence related to the case, including videos, legal documents, and messages. While not all details were immediately revealed, his attorney, Brian Friedman, declared that the materials would uncover the truth behind Blake Lively's lawsuit and provide transparency for the public. This move only heightened the courtroom drama, making it clear that the legal battle was far from over and that the stakes had never been higher. Blake's legal team quickly responded, condemning the website as an attempt to sway potential jurors and the public before the trial even began. They argued that sharing evidence outside formal court proceedings was inappropriate and could unfairly influence the case. Friedman, however, countered that, since Blake had already made her accusations public, Justin had every right to respond in kind. The judge sided with Friedman, confirming that Justin could defend himself publicly, especially given that Blake's team had initiated the media exposure. Tensions escalated further ahead of an upcoming deposition, a critical legal proceeding where sworn statements can be used in court. Blake's attorneys tried a last-ditch effort to control the situation, requesting that they be allowed to choose who could question her, presumably to shield her from Friedman's aggressive style. The judge denied the request, giving Justin's team the right to ask tough questions. This decision put Blake on the defensive, as depositions leave little room for rehearsed statements, and any misstep could severely damage her case. With Friedman now wielding significant authority, Blake's team was clearly on high alert, suggesting concern that intensive questioning might reveal details undermining her claims. Just as the hearing concluded, the judge made another pivotal ruling, merging the two lawsuits into a single, high-stakes confrontation. This combined Blake's initial lawsuit with Justin's counterclaim, forcing both sides' allegations to be evaluated together. While the merger was intended to streamline proceedings, it intensified the pressure, leaving Blake unable to easily retreat from any claim and heightening the sense of urgency as the case moved forward. The glowing profiles that once celebrated her charm, elegance, and effortless style were absent. The tone had shifted dramatically. Instead of admiration, coverage focused on her reactions, her body language, and the subtle discomfort of those standing beside her. The narrative was no longer about her achievements or influence, but about the distance between her and the industry elite who had once stood firmly at her side. In the end, the transformation was not marked by dramatic confrontation or open criticism, but by something quieter and perhaps more devastating, a gradual withdrawal of attention. The applause had softened, the excitement had dimmed, and the spotlight that once followed her so naturally had begun to drift elsewhere. What remained was the unsettling realization that in Hollywood, relevance is fleeting, and even the most carefully constructed legacy can fade when the industry decides to look in another direction. Blake was confronting something she had never imagined possible. For years, she had believed her place in Hollywood was secure, that she had built a reputation and influence strong enough to withstand any storm. She had carefully crafted her career, managed her public image with precision, and cultivated an aura of confidence that suggested permanence. But standing there amid the aftermath of what was supposed to be her defining moment, a harsh realization struck her with overwhelming force. No one in Hollywood is truly irreplaceable. And now, she was the one being replaced. She had seen this story unfold countless times before. Actresses who were once celebrated, praised endlessly, and offered the industry's most coveted opportunities had slowly faded from view as new faces emerged, younger, less controversial, and easier for the industry to embrace. Blake had always assumed she was different. She believed her sharp understanding of media narratives, her strategic decision-making, and her ability to shape public perception would protect her from the fate that had befallen so many others. Yet Hollywood has never been known for loyalty. It rewards relevance and discards what it no longer needs, no matter how powerful or admired someone once was. What she was experiencing wasn't a dramatic collapse or a single defining scandal that shattered her reputation overnight. Instead, it was something far more subtle and relentless: a slow erosion of her influence, a steady weakening of her power, and a gradual withdrawal of support from those who had once stood firmly beside her. It was a quiet distancing, a shift so gradual that it was almost imperceptible at first, yet devastating in its inevitability. And perhaps the most painful aspect was that she could feel it happening in real time. The signs were everywhere. The calls that once came regularly began to fade. Invitations became less frequent. Opportunities that once seemed guaranteed were suddenly uncertain. Doors that had always been open were now closed, or only partially ajar. It wasn't an obvious exile or public rejection. It was something colder and more calculated. She wasn't being openly pushed out. She was simply being overlooked, quietly set aside as the industry moved forward without her. The premiere had been meant as a decisive moment, a chance to measure whether she still possessed the power to command attention and reclaim her place in the spotlight. It was supposed to reaffirm her relevance, to demonstrate that her influence remained intact. Instead, it delivered a sobering verdict. The industry was watching, but not with admiration or excitement. They were observing cautiously, testing whether she still had the ability to shift the narrative in her favor. The conclusion, painfully clear, was that she did not. In the months leading up to that moment, she had convinced herself that the controversies surrounding her through public disputes, the persistent rumors, the growing weight of speculation attached to her name were temporary obstacles she could outlast. She believed that time, careful strategy, and her established reputation would eventually restore her standing. She assumed she could rise above the noise and emerge stronger. But while she was waiting for the storm to pass, Hollywood had already moved on. The realization revealed itself in subtle but unmistakable ways. Conversations that night were polite yet distant, filled with obligatory small talk and empty gestures rather than genuine warmth. The energy in the room was different from excitement when she arrived. No rush of photographers competing for the perfect image. No sense of anticipation surrounding her presence. The enthusiasm that had once defined her public appearances had vanished, replaced by a detached indifference that felt far more devastating than open criticism. The shift extended beyond the event itself. Brands that had once eagerly sought her endorsement had redirected their focus elsewhere. Directors who once viewed her as a valuable collaborator were pursuing new talent. Audiences who had once followed her career with interest were turning their attention to emerging stars. One by one, the pillars that had supported her status were disappearing, leaving her to confront a question she had never expected to ask. What happens when the world simply stops paying attention? For much of her career, she had maintained control of the narrative surrounding her life. Public relations strategies, social media presence, and carefully managed interviews had allowed her to shape how she was perceived. But this situation was different. It was no longer about controlling the story or repairing a damaged reputation, it was about relevance itself. And in Hollywood, once the industry determines that someone is no longer relevant, the path back becomes almost impossible. No dazzling red carpet appearance, no carefully timed announcement, no meticulously curated public moment can restore what has been lost. For the first time in her career, Blake found herself facing a challenge she had never prepared for. She was not experiencing a dramatic, scandalous downfall that could eventually be redeemed through reinvention or public sympathy. Instead, she was fading quietly, gradually, and almost invisibly. And in an industry built on attention and recognition, this slow disappearance is perhaps the harshest fate of all. In Hollywood, being forgotten is often far more devastating than being criticized, because criticism at least acknowledges presence. Obscurity, by contrast, leaves nothing behind but silence.